My ex-husband's parents never wanted to meet their granddaughter until he died in combat. Then they showed up 48 hours later, demanding custody. The real reason behind their sudden interest in her made me go to war. Penny was only 8 when Evan died in an IED explosion. Watching her sob into his folded flag at the funeral broke something inside me. We'd been divorced for 2 years, but Evan was still the best dad Penny could ask for, and losing him felt like losing half of our little family. What I didn't expect was his parents Richard and Patricia showing up at my apartment 48 hours after we buried their son. They'd never once visited Penny in her entire life, never sent a birthday card or Christmas gift. During our marriage, they made it clear I wasn't good enough for their precious son, and when we divorced, they acted like Penny didn't exist. But there they were, at my door in their expensive black clothes with fake concerned expressions, talking about Penny's future. Patricia walked through my tiny apartment like she was touring a crime scene, while Richard made comments about how hard this must be for me financially. They gave Penny a tablet that cost more than my monthly groceries, and started talking about extended visits to help with her grief. The way they looked at everything we owned made my skin crawl, but Penny was so broken from losing her dad that she clung to any connection to him. Within a week, they were picking her up from school without asking me first. They enrolled her in some fancy therapy program and kept mentioning how much better Penny would do in private school. My own mother started taking their side. She was so impressed by their country club lifestyle that she kept telling me I should be grateful they wanted to help. She'd never seen this kind of money before, and suddenly I was being selfish for not letting them transform Penny's life. I started working double shifts to afford things that could compete with their gifts, but every time Penny came back from their house, she seemed more distant. She'd talk about horseback riding lessons and possible trips to Europe while I packed her lunch in Tupperware containers. I was losing my daughter, and everyone around me acted like it was a good thing. The breaking point came when Penny's 9th birthday approached. I'd been saving for months to take her camping at the place where Evan proposed to me, and where we'd taken Penny at least once a year. It was our sacred tradition. Penny got excited, talking about roasting marshmallows and telling stories under the stars like we used to do with Daddy. But then Patricia announced they'd booked a Disney cruise for the same weekend. She made comments about camping being primitive while Penny deserved magical experiences. Richard kept emphasizing how much the cruise cost, and how this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. My mother immediately supported the cruise, telling Penny it was Disney and she'd remember it forever. When I tried to explain how important our camping tradition was, Patricia cut me off saying Evan was dead, and it was time Penny stopped living in the past. The worst part was watching Penny's face as she realized she had to choose. She started crying and apologizing, but said she wanted to go to Disney. I couldn't take spending her birthday weekend alone, so I drove 6 hours to my sister-in-law Veronica's house near the base where Evan was stationed. Veronica never got along with her parents, one thing we had in common. She let me cry for hours while I admitted I felt like I was failing Penny and couldn't compete with unlimited money. Then Veronica mentioned something that made me freeze. She said Evan had visited about a month before deployment and seemed really upset about something involving his parents. She disappeared into her closet and came back with a sealed envelope marked in Evan's handwriting. Veronica's hands were shaking as she handed it to me, and said Evan made her promise to give it to me if his parents ever tried anything with Penny. She said he kept researching something about family finances and kept saying they never cared before, so why now? My heart was pounding as I broke the seal and found bank statements, legal documents, and a handwritten letter from Evan. The first thing I saw was Evan's life insurance policy, showing Penny the sole beneficiary for $750,000. Evan's letter explained everything. His parents had disowned him when he married me because they considered me beneath their station. But it was his grandfather who had all the money and paid for the life insurance policy on Evan to keep his family safe, and he made sure his parents only learned about it after his death. The devastating truth hit me like a truck. They weren't grieving grandparents. They were predators who saw Penny as a payday. Evan also had documents showing Richard's business was failing, and they were facing bankruptcy. A few days later, my lawyer got sent preliminary custody paperwork, claiming I was financially unstable and emotionally unfit. The therapy sessions were meant to discredit me. That's when I realized Penny was currently on the Disney cruise, completely under their control. My phone showed a text from Patricia saying we needed to talk when they returned because Penny's future was at stake. I only had 2 days to prepare to go to war for my daughter. I stared at Patricia's text message for the 100th time while pacing Veronica's living room. The words burned into my brain. Penny's future was at stake. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I spread Evan's documents across the coffee table again. $750,000. That's what my daughter was worth to them. Veronica brought me coffee and sat down beside me. She pointed to one of the bank statements showing Richard's business hemorrhaging money for the past 18 months. The dates lined up perfectly. They'd started losing everything right before Evan deployed, but they'd hidden it well behind their country club facade. I called my lawyer Catherine but got her voicemail. Then I tried calling Penny's phone. It rang twice before Patricia's voice came through, all fake sweetness. She told me Penny was at the kids club making friends and couldn't talk. I heard Penny's voice in the background asking who was calling, then the distinct sound of a door closing before the line went dead. My stomach churned. They had my daughter on a ship in the middle of the ocean. I pulled up Patricia's Facebook page on my phone. She'd posted dozens of photos already. Penny at the character breakfast. Penny by the pool. Penny in a princess dress that probably cost more than my rent. Every caption mentioned how this poor child was finally experiencing the childhood she deserved. The comments made me sick. Patricia's friends gushing about what wonderful grandparents they were. How lucky Penny was to have them stepping up after such tragedy. One woman wrote that it was beautiful seeing them give this child opportunities her mother clearly couldn't provide. I threw my phone across the room. Veronica retrieved it and handed it back. She reminded me that losing control was exactly what they wanted. She was right. I needed to think like them now. Calculate every move. Document everything. I started taking photos of all Evan's documents. The insurance policy. The bank statements. His handwritten letter warning about his parents' true nature. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. A sticky note in Evan's writing attached to one statement. It said Richard had asked him for a loan 2 weeks before deployment. Evan had refused. My phone buzzed. Another text from Patricia. This one included a photo of Penny hugging Mickey Mouse. The message read that they needed to discuss Penny's living arrangements when they returned, for her stability and future opportunities. The threat was clear. I spent the next hour researching custody law on Veronica's laptop. The sick feeling in my stomach grew worse with every article. Grandparents with money could make a compelling case, especially if they could prove the parent was struggling financially, which I was. Every double shift I worked could be twisted into abandonment. Every Every time I'd been late to pick up because of traffic could become neglect. Veronica's ex-husband Nathan called needing her to watch their kids. He had emergency training on base and their regular sitter had canceled. Veronica looked at me apologetically, but I told her to go. Family was family. After she left, I sat alone with my racing thoughts. I tried calling Penny again. This time Richard answered. He said Penny was napping after a big day of activities. When I asked to have her call me when she woke up, he said they'd be at dinner then a show. Maybe tomorrow. His tone was so casual, like keeping my daughter from me was perfectly reasonable. After hanging up, I noticed Patricia had posted more photos. One showed their suite on the ship. It was bigger than my entire apartment. The caption mentioned how wonderful it was that Penny finally had proper space to play. Another photo showed Penny's vacation wardrobe laid out on the bed, designer clothes with tags still on them. I scrolled through the comments again and froze. My own mother had commented on several photos. She wrote about how blessed Penny was to have grandparents who could provide such experiences, how these memories would last a lifetime, how Patricia and Richard were angels for stepping up. I called my mother immediately. She answered on the third ring, sounding defensive already. I asked her what she was doing, commenting on those posts like that. She said she was just being polite and grateful. When I tried to explain what was really happening, she cut me off. She said I was being paranoid and selfish, that good grandparents wanting to spoil their granddaughter wasn't a crime. I told her about the insurance money, the bankruptcy, Evan's warnings. She went quiet for a moment, then said, even if that was true, wouldn't Penny be better off with people who could afford to give her everything? The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own mother had already chosen their side. After ending the call, I sat in Veronica's guest room trying not to panic. They'd isolated me perfectly, turned my family against me, document me as unstable, present themselves as saviors, all while holding my daughter hostage on a cruise ship where I couldn't reach her. I opened my laptop again and started writing everything down, every interaction, every threat disguised as concern, every calculated move they'd made since showing up at my door. If they wanted to play dirty, I needed ammunition of my own. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Penny. Her voice was small and confused. She said she'd borrowed a phone from another kid because hers wasn't working right. She wanted to know why I hadn't called her back. My heart broke. I told her I'd been trying to call but kept missing her. She said Grandma told her I was too busy with work to talk, that I'd said she should enjoy her vacation without worrying about home. I kept my voice steady and told her that wasn't true, that I missed her every second. She started to tell me about the cruise, but then I heard Patricia's voice in the background. Sharp, angry. The line went dead. I called back immediately, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. They'd found her and taken the phone. I stared at the ceiling all night, running scenarios in my head. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I would document every single thing they did, every post, every prevented phone call, every lie they told my daughter. I would find others who'd seen their true nature, build a case that even their money couldn't buy their way out of. Veronica returned early the next morning, exhausted from watching 3 kids all night. I showed her the Facebook posts and explained what happened with Penny's call. She shook her head in disgust and offered to write a statement about Evan's concerns. It was a start. I drove back home that afternoon, using the 6-hour drive to practice what I would say to my lawyer, how I would present Evan's evidence, how I would counter their inevitable attacks on my character. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt ready for war, but walking into my empty home, seeing Penny's breakfast bowl still in the sink from before she left, the weight of what I was facing crashed over me. They had money, connections, my own mother on their side. All I had was the truth and a dead soldier's warning. I sat at my kitchen table with Evan's documents spread before me. Somewhere out there, my daughter was being poisoned against me by people who saw her as nothing more than a payday. The cruise would end tomorrow. They would bring her back, but I knew they had no intention of returning her to me. Not really. This was just the beginning of their campaign to steal her away. I picked up my phone and started making calls. First to Catherine again, leaving a detailed message about the emergency. Then to Penny's school, alerting them to the situation. Then to every single person I could think of who might help me fight this battle. As the sun set over my small apartment, I stared at a photo of Evan, Penny, and me from happier times. Before the divorce, before the deployment, before his parents revealed their true nature. I made a silent promise to him that I would protect our daughter, no matter what it took. The war for Penny was about to begin, and I would not let them win. The cruise ship docked at noon the next day. I waited in the parking lot of the port terminal, watching families stream out with their luggage and souvenirs. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then I saw them. Patricia held Penny's hand while Richard pushed a cart loaded with shopping bags. Penny wore a new outfit I'd never seen before, complete with designer sunglasses perched on her head. I got out of my car and walked toward them. Penny's face lit up when she saw me, but Patricia's grip on her hand tightened. Richard positioned himself between us, explaining that Penny needed rest after such an exciting trip. Patricia added that they'd already made arrangements to take her to their house for a few days to help her readjust. I reached for my daughter, but Richard stepped forward, blocking my path. The security guard nearby watched our interaction closely. I realized how this looked, a disheveled woman confronting a well-dressed elderly couple with a child. I forced myself to stay calm and told Penny I'd see her soon. Patricia's smile was triumphant as they loaded my daughter into their Mercedes. Back at my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a formal letter from Patricia's lawyer outlining their concerns about my fitness as a parent. They cited my work schedule, my modest living conditions, and what they called my erratic behavior during Penny's absence. The letter suggested mediation to discuss Penny's best interests. I called Catherine's office again. This time her assistant answered and scheduled an emergency appointment for the following morning. I spent the rest of the day organizing Evan's documents and creating a timeline of Richard and Patricia's actions since the funeral. Every detail mattered now. That evening, my neighbor Carol knocked on my door. She'd always been friendly, often watching Penny when I worked late, but now she seemed uncomfortable, explaining that Richard had approached her in the building's garden area. He'd been charming, asking about the neighborhood and mentioning how he was trying to ensure his granddaughter had a stable environment. Carol admitted he'd asked questions about my work schedule and whether I often left Penny alone. The manipulation was spreading like poison through every aspect of my life. After Carol left, I checked my phone to find more Facebook posts from Patricia. Photos of Penny's temporary room at their house, a space bigger than my entire living room, decorated in pink and white with a canopy bed and matching furniture. The comments praised Patricia for providing such a loving space for her grieving granddaughter. I noticed Patricia's phone checking habit in several photos. A nervous tick where she glanced at her screen every few minutes, even mid-activity. activity with Penny, like someone monitoring stocks or investments. The realization made my stomach turn. She was literally tracking her potential payday through my daughter. Catherine's office was in a modest building downtown. She listened carefully as I laid out everything: the insurance policy, the bankruptcy documents, Evan's letter. Her expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. She explained that while we had proof of financial motive, family court would focus on Penny's current welfare. Richard and Patricia's wealth would be seen as an advantage, not a weapon. We discussed strategy. Catherine advised me to maintain strict documentation of all interactions and to avoid any behavior that could be construed as hostile or unstable. She would file a response to their custody petition and request all communication go through legal channels. The retainer fee made me wince, but I handed over my credit card knowing I'd max it out if necessary. Leaving Catherine's office, I drove to Penny's school. The principal, Mrs. Chen, greeted me with visible discomfort. She explained that Patricia had been added as an emergency contact at Penny's recent therapy session, which I'd missed due to work. The therapist had recommended it for Penny's emotional security. I asked to see the forms and noticed Patricia's signature alongside mine, as if she had equal authority. The school pickup that afternoon turned into a subtle battlefield. Patricia arrived in her Mercedes just as I pulled up in my 10-year-old Honda. Other parents watched the awkward dance as we both approached the pickup line. Penny emerged looking confused, glancing between us. Patricia called out that she'd promised to take Penny shopping for school supplies. I firmly stated that Penny would come home with me. The teacher on duty looked uncomfortable, checking her list. Since both of us were authorized for pickup, she suggested we work it out ourselves. Patricia's voice carried across the parking lot as she reminded everyone within earshot that she'd cleared her entire schedule to support Penny during this difficult time. While I'd been too busy working to even call during the cruise, I felt the eyes of other parents on me, some with sympathy, others with judgment. I heard whispered comparisons to my behavior right after Evan's death, when grief had made it hard to maintain routines. One mother muttered to another about how I'd looked just as unstable back then. The comparison stung because it was partially true. Those first weeks after Evan's death had been a blur of barely functioning. Penny finally came to me, but Patricia made sure to give her a long hug first, whispering something that made Penny glance at me with concern. During the drive home, Penny was quiet. When I asked about the cruise, she mentioned how Grandma had explained that Mommy was sick when Daddy died, and that's why some of her memories from that time were confusing. The poison was already spreading. That evening, I helped Penny with homework while trying to act normal. She mentioned casually that her friend Emma had asked why her mommy was mean to her daddy before he went to heaven. My heart sank. Patricia's version of our divorce was being spread through 9-year-old gossip networks. My phone buzzed with a text from the neighborhood mom group. Someone had screenshotted my response about protecting Penny from exploitation and shared it with concern about parental alienation. The group administrator suggested I might benefit from counseling to process my grief in healthier ways. I left the group chat, knowing my exit would be noted and discussed. Over the following days, the pressure intensified. My boss called me into his office to discuss my recent absences. He'd received a concerned call about my stability from someone claiming to be a family friend. My request for schedule flexibility was denied, with a warning that further disruptions would result in termination. At home, I discovered Evan's laptop still had his military email access saved. Late one night, I logged in, knowing it was a violation but desperate for any ammunition. His draft folder contained unsent emails to his commanding officer expressing concerns about his parents' sudden interest in his finances. One draft mentioned their questions about his life insurance and benefits, dated just weeks before his deployment. The school called about an incident where I'd been observed taking photos of Patricia's car in the parking lot. Security had flagged it as concerning surveillance behavior. I tried explaining I was documenting her presence for legal reasons, but the damage was done. Another mark against me in their files. My credit card statement arrived showing the maxed balance from Catherine's retainer. The minimum payment would strain my already tight budget. Meanwhile, Patricia posted photos of Penny at an expensive children's boutique, trying on clothes that cost more than my weekly groceries. The caption mentioned how every child deserved to feel special during difficult times. Veronica called with bad news. Her husband had threatened divorce if she testified about Evan's concerns. His military career couldn't withstand association with a custody battle that might make headlines. She apologized through tears, saying she believed me but couldn't lose her own family. She would provide the envelope but nothing more. The isolation tightened like a noose. At school pickup, parents crossed the parking lot to avoid me. I overheard fragments of conversations about the unstable one and realized I was being discussed in a private Facebook group for school parents. My attempts to document Patricia's manipulation were being reframed as obsessive behavior. During a supervised therapy session, the counselor asked Penny about her feelings. Patricia had arranged for me to be observed through a two-way mirror. I watched Penny describe feeling torn between two worlds, the exciting life her grandparents offered and the familiar but smaller world with me. The therapist's notes would become part of the court record. Richard's influence spread to unexpected places. My friend Sarah sheepishly admitted she needed to distance herself from our friendship. Her daughter needed expensive orthodontic work, and Patricia's husband's dental practice offered payment plans. She couldn't afford to be seen taking sides. Another ally lost to financial pressure. I started adopting Patricia's tactics out of desperation. When Richard visited the local coffee shop, I struck up conversations with the barista, learning his routine. I discovered he met with his business partner there every Tuesday, and positioned myself at a nearby table to overhear their stressed discussions about bankruptcy proceedings. One morning, I manufactured a dental emergency to visit Richard's practice. While waiting, I photographed billing statements left visible on the reception desk, showing overdue accounts and final notices. The receptionist caught me and threatened to call security. I left quickly, but the damage to my reputation spread through their professional network. Patricia escalated her psychological warfare. She filed an emergency motion to move the custody hearing up by 6 weeks, catching me off guard. Catherine was on vacation, and her replacement was unfamiliar with our case. The accelerated timeline meant less time to gather evidence and prepare witnesses. During a particularly low moment, I discovered an old voicemail I'd left Evan months before his deployment. In it, I complained about Penny being difficult lately and needing a break. Patricia had accessed Evan's phone and now possessed evidence of me struggling with parenting. My own exhausted words would be used against me. The financial strain broke me at the grocery store. My card was declined while buying Penny's favorite cereal. The meltdown that followed, tears, shaking hands, fumbling for change, was witnessed by several people. To observers, I looked unstable, possibly under the influence of something. Another piece of ammunition for Patricia's case. I tried recording one of Patricia's threatening calls, but my phone died mid-conversation. She'd noticed the recording notification before the battery failed. Now I looked paranoid, claiming threats I couldn't prove. The mediation session that followed treated my accusations as desperate attempts to avoid losing custody. Penny's teacher, Ms. Martinez, had always been supportive, but after an anonymous complaint about her showing favoritism, she pulled back. She had 3 children to feed and couldn't risk her job over involvement in a custody dispute. She would testify only to facts, not interpretations. The war consumed everything. I lost my weekend job when customers complained about the drama I brought to work. The owner apologetically explained that my personal situation was affecting business. I later learned my replacement was a member of Patricia's book club. Desperate for evidence, I used Evan's laptop to access shared photo accounts before Patricia realized they existed. The autocomplete feature revealed his last searches, emergency custody, and protecting my daughter. He'd known this was coming and tried to prepare. I downloaded years of photos showing our close mother-daughter bond before Patricia could delete them. Reading between the lines of Patricia's Facebook posts revealed timeline inconsistencies. She claimed to have been devastated by Evan's death, but her posts from that time showed her at charity galas and wine tastings, with no mention of her son's passing until after learning about the insurance. The truth about Patricia's presence at the hospital when Evan died emerged through a parking receipt I found in Evan's effects. She had been there, but at a different time than she claimed. The manipulation ran so deep that even her grief was performed for an audience. My investigation caused collateral damage I hadn't anticipated. The receptionist at Richard's dental practice was suspended after being blamed for the leaked financial information. Her husband threatened to leave over her job loss in association with a crazy woman trying to destroy a grieving family. I watched her cry at school pickup, knowing I'd ruined an innocent person's life. Sarah finally asked the question that haunted me. What if I was wrong? What if Richard and Patricia, despite their flaws, genuinely loved Penny? The doubt crept in during sleepless nights. Maybe their concern was real, mixed with financial desperation. Maybe I was the one causing harm by fighting so hard. Evidence mounted on both sides. I found bankruptcy filing papers in Richard's car during a school pickup, photographing them through the window. But Patricia countered by documenting every school event I'd missed, every late pickup, every sign of financial struggle. The truth became a weapon that cut both ways. Evan's military buddy called after hearing about the custody battle. He owed Evan his life from an incident during deployment, but wouldn't risk his career testifying about personal conversations. He confirmed Evan's concerns about his parents, but only in an off-record phone call that couldn't help me legally. The revelation that shattered me came from Evan's military emails. He'd known about his parents' financial troubles before deployment, but chose to complete his tour anyway. He'd been documenting their manipulative behavior for years, preparing for this exact scenario. But the emails also revealed I'd missed signs of his depression before deployment. I'd been too caught up in our divorce aftermath to notice his struggles. Patricia's lawyer filed papers suggesting my public accusations showed vindictive behavior unbefitting a parent. The narrative shifted from me protecting Penny to me being unable to accept help due to pride and paranoia. Every defensive action I took reinforced their portrayal of instability. I realized the honest, trusting version of myself had to die for the strategic, suspicious version to survive this battle. I started thinking like them, planning moves ahead, considering collateral damage acceptable. The transformation felt like losing part of my soul, but it was the only way to fight their war. During one exchange, Richard broke down in genuine tears over losing his last connection to Evan. The pain seemed real, cutting through his calculated facade. We'd both been crying at Evan's grave on the same day, at different times, mourning the same loss while fighting over its legacy. Everything hinged on finding concrete evidence of their financial motivations predating their custody interest. I knew it existed somewhere in Evan's careful documentation. The military insurance paperwork naming backup guardians would be the key, if I could access it through proper channels. As the custody hearing approached, battle lines were drawn throughout our community. Local business owners chose sides based on financial connections. The school divided between those who saw Patricia's generosity and those who recognized manipulation. Even the coffee shop barista knew which side her tips came from. I discovered Patricia now slept in Evan's childhood bedroom at their house, wearing his high school Letterman jacket. The scent of his cologne still lingered on his things. She'd created a shrine to the son she'd disowned, rewriting history to erase her rejection of him. Penny mentioned how Grandma cried looking at Daddy's photos, performing grief for an audience of one. The final pieces of evidence came together slowly. Bank documents showed Richard and Patricia had known about the insurance policy weeks before expressing custody interest. Their first inquiry to a lawyer preceded their first visit to Penny. The timeline proved financial motivation, but proving it in family court would require more than suspicious timing. Patricia offered a deal. I could have a private goodbye with Penny before her permanent placement with them in exchange for dropping the insurance allegations. The cruelty of forcing me to choose between truth and time with my daughter exemplified their tactics. My refusal was spun as not caring about Penny's emotional needs during transition. With 2 weeks until the hearing, I'd assembled a case that revealed the truth, but at devastating personal cost. Former friends avoided me. My reputation was destroyed. My finances were in ruins. But Evan's evidence remained solid, waiting for its day in court. The war for Penny had transformed everyone it touched, leaving scars that would last long after any legal resolution. The military contact who owed Evan his life finally agreed to meet me at a diner near the base. He slid a folder across the table containing copies of Evan's official military paperwork. Inside was the smoking GN, insurance forms dated 3 months before deployment, listing me as primary guardian with specific instructions that his parents were not to have unsupervised access to Penny. The witness signature belonged to his commanding officer. I drove straight to Catherine's office with the documents. She examined them carefully, then made several phone calls. Within hours, she'd filed supplemental evidence with the court. The timeline was irrefutable. Evan had documented his concerns through official military channels, creating a paper trail his parents couldn't dispute. Patricia's response came through her lawyer within 24 hours. They claimed the documents were forged, demanding authentication. Catherine smiled grimly and scheduled depositions with 3 military officials who'd witnessed Evan's signatures. The desperation in their counterclaim was obvious. At school pickup, I noticed Richard's Mercedes had a parking boot. The coffee shop barista mentioned seeing him arguing with a tow truck driver about unpaid tickets. Their financial situation was deteriorating faster than they could hide it. Patricia's designer handbag had been replaced with a knockoff, though she carried it with the same haughty attitude. The depositions schedule forced Patricia to miss several of her standing appointments with Penny. My daughter came home confused about why Grandma had canceled their shopping trip. I focused on homework and normal routines, letting Penny process the changes without my commentary. She fell asleep on the couch watching her favorite movie, clutching the stuffed animal Evan had given her. Catherine called with news that Richard's business partner had agreed to testify. The man feared legal liability if he stayed silent about the bankruptcy fraud. He'd provide documentation showing Richard had hidden assets while claiming poverty to creditors. The web of lies was unraveling faster than they could spin new ones. I arrived early for Penny's school play, securing front row seats. Patricia and Richard entered separately, their united front cracking. They sat 3 rows behind me, Patricia's phone buzzing constantly with what looked like urgent messages. Richard's hands shook as he tried to operate the video camera. During intermission, the school counselor pulled me aside. She'd noticed concerning changes in Patricia's behavior during recent visits. Agitation, repetitive questions about insurance policies, and comments about securing Penny's future that seemed more financial than emotional. She'd documented everything in her official notes. The authentication of Evan's military documents happened quickly. His commanding officer testified via video link, confirming every signature and timestamp. The insurance company representative verified the policy details, including a clause Evan had added preventing any guardian from accessing funds without court oversight. He'd thought of everything. Patricia's facade cracked during a chance encounter at the pharmacy. She cornered me near the vitamins, hissing accusations about destroying their family. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged. The pharmacist watched nervously as Patricia's voice rose, drawing stares from other customers. Security eventually escorted her out. Catherine presented our evidence methodically. Bank records showed Richard and Patricia had researched Penny's insurance value before ever contacting me. Their Google searches included grandparent custody rights and accessing minors' inheritance, weeks before they'd shown any interest in Penny's well-being. The digital footprint was damning. Richard's business partner testified reluctantly, but thoroughly. He revealed Richard had taken loans against future expectations of family money coming in, clear evidence they'd been counting on Penny's insurance before they'd even met her. The partner produced emails where Richard discussed timeline strategies for gaining custody. The guardian ad litem interviewed Penny at school, away from all parties. My daughter's honest confusion about her grandparents' sudden interest came through clearly. She mentioned how Grandma always asked about Daddy's special papers and whether Mommy had a safety deposit box. The guardian's report noted these unusual preoccupations. Patricia made a critical error by attempting to access Evan's military pension information using old passwords. The system flagged the unauthorized attempt, triggering an investigation. Military police contacted Catherine about potential fraud charges. Patricia's lawyer withdrew from the case the next day. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, reviewing Evan's letter one final time. His words about protecting Penny from those who would exploit her rang truer than ever. Inside the building, Patricia paced the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear as she tried to secure new legal representation. Richard sat alone on a bench, staring at nothing. The judge reviewed the evidence in chambers before calling us in. Patricia had managed to find a last-minute attorney who looked overwhelmed by the case file. Richard's business partner sat in the gallery, clearly uncomfortable but legally obligated to appear. The court reporter prepared her equipment as we took our positions. Catherine presented the timeline with surgical precision. Each piece of evidence built upon the last. Evan's military documents, the Google searches, the bankruptcy papers, the attempted pension access. Patricia's attorney tried to object, but lacked grounds. The truth was too well documented to dispute. When confronted with their own emails about the insurance money, Richard finally broke. He admitted they'd seen Penny as their only option to avoid bankruptcy. Patricia turned on him instantly, claiming she'd been manipulated by her husband's financial desperation. Their united front shattered completely as they blamed each other. The judge ordered a recess to review additional evidence. In the hallway, Patricia approached me one last time. Her designer clothes hung loosely on her frame, stress having carved away her polished appearance. She begged me to consider Penny's future opportunities. I walked away without responding. Catherine received word that criminal charges were being considered for fraud and attempted financial exploitation of a minor. The military took threats against service members' families seriously, even posthumously. Patricia's attempts to access Evan's benefits had triggered protocols she hadn't anticipated. The final hearing lasted 3 hours. The judge methodically dismantled every claim Richard and Patricia had made. Their financial motivations were established beyond doubt. The evidence showed calculated manipulation rather than grandparental concern. Even their therapy recommendations for Penny were exposed as attempts to build a custody case. Richard's business officially filed for bankruptcy during the proceedings. Court officers served papers as he sat in the courtroom. Patricia tried to distance herself, claiming separate finances, but evidence showed joint planning of the custody scheme. Their house of cards collapsed entirely. The judge's ruling was comprehensive. Full custody remained with me. Richard and Patricia were granted supervised visitation only, contingent on completing counseling about appropriate boundaries. Any access to Penny's inheritance required court approval with multiple oversight mechanisms. They were also ordered to pay my legal fees. Patricia wept as the ruling was read, but they weren't tears of grief for a lost grandchild. She kept muttering about the money, seemingly forgetting everyone could hear her. Richard stared at his hands, looking older than his years. Their scheme had cost them everything: reputation, finances, and any genuine relationship with their granddaughter. I picked up Penny from school that afternoon like any other day. She asked if she'd still see her grandparents sometimes. I explained they needed some time to think about their choices, keeping the explanation age appropriate. She nodded solemnly, then asked if we could finally go camping for her birthday. The relief in her voice broke my heart. Catherine filed the paperwork to establish the protected trust for Penny's inheritance that day. Multiple safeguards ensured no one could access it for personal gain. The insurance money would fund her education and future, exactly as Evan intended. His foresight had protected her even from beyond the grave. The community reaction was mixed, but swift. Some neighbors who'd supported Patricia quietly apologized for misjudging the situation. Others maintained their distance, unable to admit they'd been fooled. The school implemented new protocols about emergency contact additions, small changes, but meaningful ones. I returned to work with a modified schedule my boss approved after learning the full story. The financial pressure eased, knowing Patricia and Richard would have to pay the legal bills. My credit cards would take time to recover, but the crisis had passed. Normal life felt foreign after months of warfare. Penny's therapy sessions now focused on processing the confusion of her grandparents grandparents' behavior rather than building their custody case. The counselor helped her understand that sometimes adults make bad choices because of money. Penny's resilience amazed me as she adapted to the new reality with the flexibility only children possess. 3 months later, Richard and Patricia's house went into foreclosure. They moved to a small apartment across town, their country club life a distant memory. Patricia sent a letter requesting to see Penny for her birthday. The court-appointed supervisor would oversee the visit, ensuring appropriate boundaries. I found myself at Evan's grave on a quiet Tuesday morning. The headstone was simple, military issue, but someone had left fresh flowers. Not Patricia's expensive arrangements, but simple daisies like the ones Evan used to pick for Penny. A small card read, "Thank you for protecting them," in unfamiliar handwriting. The supervised visit happened at a neutral location. Patricia looked diminished, her designer clothes replaced with department store basics. She brought Penny a modest gift, a photo album of Evan as a child. For once, the gesture seemed genuine rather than calculated. Richard barely spoke, shame weighing down his shoulders. Penny handled the visit with surprising maturity. She thanked them for the album and shared stories about school. When Patricia started crying about missing opportunities, Penny simply patted her hand and changed the subject. My daughter had learned boundaries I'd never had to teach her. The war was over, but its effects rippled through our lives. Trust came harder now. I scrutinized motives behind every kindness, but Penny thrived despite everything. She joined the school choir and made new friends. Her laughter returned gradually, no longer forced or performed for anyone's benefit. One evening, while helping with homework, Penny asked if Daddy knew his parents would try to take her away. I showed her the letter Evan had written, the parts appropriate for her age. She traced his handwriting with her finger and smiled. He'd loved her enough to protect her from anything, even his own parents. The camping trip finally happened 6 months late, but perfect in its simplicity. We roasted marshmallows and told stories under the stars. Penny said she felt Daddy watching over us. I agreed, knowing Evan's greatest victory wasn't in death benefits or legal documents, but in ensuring his daughter grew up with a parent who truly loved her. Richard and Patricia faded from our daily lives. Their supervised visits became sporadic, then stopped entirely. They sent birthday cards that Penny politely acknowledged but didn't treasure. The grandparents who'd tried to steal her future became a cautionary tale about greed destroying family bonds. I returned to school part-time, using evening classes to work toward a better future for us both. Penny did homework alongside me at the kitchen table. We were building something new from the ashes of what they'd tried to destroy. Not wealthy, but rich in ways that mattered. The insurance money sat protected in trust, accumulating interest for Penny's future. Every statement reminded me of Evan's sacrifice and foresight. He'd given his life for his country, but also ensured his daughter's security against those who would exploit her grief. Years would pass before Penny fully understood what had happened. For now, she knew only that some people had tried to use her daddy's memory for bad reasons, but love had protected her. That was enough truth for a 9-year-old to carry. Our small apartment felt like a fortress of normalcy after the storm. Penny's artwork covered the refrigerator. Her laughter filled the rooms. We'd survived the war for her future, keeping intact what truly mattered. Our family of 2, small but unbreakable, protected by a father's love that transcended death itself.